Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. And in this video, I wanted to talk about the presentation this morning from Mike Sievert at the Goldman Sachs conference. Well, it really wasn't a presentation. It was more a one-on-one interview with Brett from Goldman Sachs asking questions, and Mike Sievert simply giving his perspective and answering the questions. So we know Verizon went first, then AT&T CEO, and now we had Mike Sievert last in terms of the wireless companies today. So, you know the saying, save the best for last? Well, this was a tough one to sit through because some of the answers Mike Sievert gave were irrational and they didn't make sense. It wasn't common sense. In a way, it was true, but it didn't make sense at the same time. So let me further elaborate and explain. So, and I'll also leave this article in the description from TMO News so you guys can read the script from Mike Sievert verbatim. So he was asked about the leadership in 5G. Are they able to maintain the leadership in 5G? And then he was also asked about growth, retail distribution, just, all the answers and all the questions that any analyst should ask, and especially T-Mobile, since they are so under-indexed beyond the consumer business. So in the consumer wireless business, they have gained fair market share. I let you guys know that plenty of times now. They have fair market share, and that's in the top 100 markets. And Mike Sievert discloses this in the conference as well. Where they are under indexed is business, rural America, and then they're getting freshly started in the home broadband space. So of course, they are under indexed in that versus fair share. What's very interesting, as a company that's been so successful at growing over the years, the guidance that they gave up until 2025 shows that their growth, even with them getting to the 20% in those business segments that I just mentioned, is still under indexed. They go from the low teens to 20% in rural. That's under indexed. That they still don't gain fair share at that total percentage that they're guiding. Same with business. So there's further growth to get 100%. And that's what he discloses. He's like, in these business segments, 90% of customers are not with us. So there's a lot of growth out there for them to chase. That is 100% correct. There is no doubt about that. That makes perfect sense. They never competed in rural. They didn't have the network to. Now they're trying to grow and expand into those markets. It makes sense because, like I mentioned, in the urban environment, the top 100 markets, they have gained fair share. So growing in those markets is going to be a lot tougher. It's going to be a bloodbath, a back and forth. Hey, I got a better phone deal. I'm going to take this customer back that you took from me last year. That's the kind of scenario that it's going to be in the top 100 markets. So a couple of things that he was stating in terms of the leadership and maintaining the 5G lead. He says they'll do so for years. He says the competition won't even come close. He says AT&T and Verizon have not disclosed plans beyond 2023, which will have them covering around 200 million people. So according to him, they're not touching rural America with C-band. He flat out said that. He was like, I have not seen them guide beyond 2023. So therefore, in our run rate and projections, we don't see Verizon nor AT&T touching rural America with C-band. And he says rightfully so, because they're going to have to densify beyond belief and spend money to deploy that spectrum in rural America. Those were his words. And that portion for me was hard to sit through because as a company, and this is where the common sense comes in, if you are not going to utilize that spectrum in some way, shape, or form, why are you going to buy it? the most spectrum, the largest chunk of that C-band spectrum, the 200 megahertz contiguous. Verizon bought it in rural America. They didn't get 200 megahertz in the top 100 markets. Most of those markets, they come in at around 160 megahertz. I'm sure if I go over the map, there may be some of those bigger markets that they bought 200 megahertz, but mainly they bought 200 in rural America. Same with AT&T. They bought it in rural America, 80 megahertz of it. They're going to compete in rural. Now, what can remain speculative is how they approach that and how they get there, because they really did not give us a plan beyond 23. They said deployments continue after that. That's all they really said at both analyst days, AT&T and Verizon. And I watched those analyst days over and over and over again. I know them by memory. Each of them says that 23 and beyond, they'll keep deploying that spectrum, but they really don't guide to where they will be by 2025 or anything along those lines. So T-Mobile, again, Mike Sievert reconfirms that they will be at 300 million covered by the end of 23, which is big. I give them that. If they can get that, and according to him, again, it is all funded with the current CapEx that's been guided. 12 billion, 12 billion, 9 billion. All three of those years, the CapEx, the fund, touching 300 million pops with 2.5 is all funded in that capital investment. So just to kind of put that in perspective, and he did say this as well, when they get to 200 million covered by the end of the year, that is the fastest that we will see them get to that milestone. He says going from 200 to 300 million covered, they will have to cover 5 times the landmass that it took them to get from 0 to 200 million covered. So to cover the last 100 million, it's going to take them 5 times more the landmass to cover from 200 to 300. That's a lot of work. That is a lot of work. That's a lot of manpower, a lot of labor hours, a lot of equipment that will be needed to cover that last 100 million to get to the 300 million. Now, in the meantime, in between time, they still have to deploy new sites. There's another 10,000 in the works. So keep that in mind. That's more labor hours and more equipment necessary. And we're talking poles. We're talking new baseband units. Of course, in some cases, probably a lot of the times they're going to be able to co-locate on sites, but they're going to need a lot of contractors, a lot of tower climbers to get that last 100 million covered. So they get to 200 million at the end of this year. They're going to need all of 2022 and all of 2023, the next 2 years, to get to that 300 million milestone. So this is going to take them the longest to get to that last 100 million. So we're going to see we are really going to see what T-Mobile is made of here over these next 2 years. It's going to be an interesting ride. For some of you, it's going to be very bumpy. There's going to be a lot of potholes on the way on this journey. Some of you are going to have service interruptions, service disruption, I should say. Some of these towers, they're going to completely rip them, decommission them for a little while. We'll turn them off, not decommission, turn them off. You're going to have service issues in that department. Some of you Sprint customers are going to have issues as well. And that's something that he was also mentioning that I wanted to bring up to end out the video. I didn't want to make this one too long. Most of this has already been discussed, and it's very self-explanatory. Something interesting and something for you guys to prepare for if you are still on a Sprint account. He said this several times, and I think that's what they're really planning on. They're looking to move and migrate full accounts starting in 22 in a big way. So I know they have an obligation with the FCC to uphold until 2023, but they're going to try to move most customers from Sprint to T-Mobile in 2022. And they're going to go about this in a big way. he says they're already seeing good results. The customers that are fully migrating, I'm talking fully everything, the phones, the plan, getting on a Magenta Max plan, taxes and fees. This is what he's discussing in this interview. He says those customers that have done so, and they're tracking this very closely, their churn numbers are now as low as the Magenta base. So as the Sprint customer moves to T-Mobile, they're not leaving. Where he says the churn is elevated is with Sprint. And he says that's where Verizon and AT&T are still succeeding, because they're taking advantage with the phone promos and everything that's out there with the elevated Sprint churn. He says once they have that under control, he said he's going to clean AT&T and Verizon's clocks. Those were his words. He says he's going to take their lunch money. And they're going to win. They're going to win in rural. They're going to win in business. He says right now they're in test trials with 12 of the Fortune 50 companies that are testing 100 phones, and they hope to get them to commit very soon. So they're going to try to penetrate the business segment very hard. They're working. Don't get me wrong, they're working, but they have a lot of work ahead of them. A lot of work. That's where I want to leave the video. There's a lot of work for T-Mobile to do. In the next year, their main focus is likely going to be the migration part of the business, because the elevated Sprint churn, those customers are just leaving. So I think they might just bite the sour apple, move the customers over that want to come. The ones that are going to leave, they're likely to leave anyway. And that Sprint churn being as high as it is, it does hurt the T-Mobile base a little, because now they may have to fight for those customers back. But again, he makes several crazy points, in my opinion. He says Verizon and AT&T are throwing $1,000 out there for what? He says, for you to have the same experience on their network. You're going from 4G to 4G again. That's pretty much what he said, alluding to DSS, of course. So he's making a lot of crazy claims. In a way, he is right, but we all know C-band is coming on air. CBRS is being implemented. AT&T already has a great base layer of spectrum from the LTE era. They're going to be fine. They're going to be just fine. There are other tweaks and workarounds, especially for AT&T. They can densify much deeper if they need to keep up with performance. I know T-Mobile is eager to buy more spectrum, so it's all going to be a back and forth in terms of competing. I think T-Mobile is partially on the right track. I think now they're a little not out of touch, but they're saying things that don't make sense. Like I mentioned, saying that they're not going to touch rural America. They bought the spectrum there. What are they going to do? Sit on it? That just makes no sense. They spent billions and billions of dollars that affect the bottom line, and they need to make those profits and the revenue back. And the way to do so is fixed wireless, for Verizon at least, in rural United States, by using 100 megahertz as backhaul and 100 megahertz for downlink and uplink. So that's how they're going to approach the United States, the rural United States. And I think they do so successfully. May that take them a little more time beyond 23? I think yes. I think that's why Verizon couldn't give a clear guidance beyond that, because just like T-Mobile, Verizon will have to grow into this. Where they need densification in rural America, they will build it. But that's going to take time. They probably couldn't give a specific guidance beyond 23, because they really don't know where they will be. They have to go through zoning permits. They have to fight counties, municipalities. Some of them don't want sites. There's going to be a back and forth. So it may take Verizon until 2024, 2025 to even gain significant footprint in rural United States. So let me know what you think about all this in the comment section down below. Again, I look forward to reading your comments. I hope you enjoyed. If you are new to the channel, or you have been on the channel and you have not yet liked, shared, subscribed, make sure you do so. Hit that notification bell so you are notified when I do upload content. Make sure to follow my social media outlets for more updates and interactions. Thanks again for watching. This is Tyrone with Tech Life. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.